Okay, hello and welcome. Another week, another episode of myNewsWrap about news from the SAP and Microsoft world. Quite some things happened this week, so let's jump into it. As usual, all the news are linked in my GitHub repo, so let's walk them through. First, some general news about SAP. Quite surprisingly, at least for me, they acquired another customer experience CRM solution called Emersys in order to complement the omni-channel customer engagement. For me, it was a bit surprising, to be honest, because I thought now they are more getting things done in the sense of integrating all their stuff and not that much still focusing on pure customer experience. But I was wrong, and they have now another thing to integrate into their portfolio. So quite some work ahead. What's interesting is, well, not my take, but there are more bright hats and analysts out there for sure. So that's why I referenced also a blog by John Reed, who doubles down on the story and on the acquisition. And what's quite interesting in there is that's something that was also completely new to me, is that the label C4HANA is no longer a product or umbrella name. It was ditched in June this year, and it's now called SAP Customer Experience Portfolio. Quite surprising, for me at least. Interesting read. One further interesting topic or news, which is quite misleading from the title, is that there is a new person in the area of intelligence spend and business network group. Not my part of the town, but there is a little small section that is important for all the ones who look at SAP Cloud Platform, because the president of SAP Cloud Platform, Günther Rothermail, was switched, and now Michael Weingartner is the new president of SAP Cloud Platform. No idea what that means, no idea how that could influence the direction of SAP Cloud Platform, but it's really interesting. It's now the second time, I think, in the last 2 weeks that there is a press announcement about the topic A, and somewhere in between there is another information that's quite interesting and is not really linked to the original stuff. So, however, now we have a new president on the SAP Cloud Platform. And that's the segue to the SAP Cloud Platform topic. So there is another blog by Tobias Hoffmann, of course. Another week, another blog by Tobias. And it's, again, a very interesting read on his point of view about the core values of SAP SAP Cloud Platform services. Really from a real world point of view. So that's it's not too long, so quite fast read, but quite interesting. And if you are into the discussion about SAP Cloud Platform and all the things around it, definitely worth to read it. Then there was some news about SAP Cloud Platform Discovery Center. So those of you who are working with SAP Cloud Platform, they probably know the Discovery Center, which is kind of a central landing zone. If you want to kick off projects, start your journey on the SAP Cloud Platform, it's more really from a project or customer perspective. Nevertheless, it's quite interesting. There are also some kind of so-called missions on there that show you best practices, and there is also always to each mission a linked bill of material on there. So what you need in order to make that reality. And there are some new features on the on this Discovery Center. Now, as I said, it's more for customers, so don't be surprised. I was surprised, Christian Drum was surprised, that some areas in this Discovery Center are not accessible if you are not a customer. So yeah, just be aware of that little pitfall. Then I stumbled across a nice blog about connecting or setting up OAuth for SAP Cloud Integration and SAP Cloud Platform Cloud Foundry environment by Divya Mary. It's a step-by-step introduction on how to make things work, so how to bring the two worlds together. Really very well explained, and I think very helpful once you come into this area and have to link those two worlds together. Okay, then another point about developing applications, developing secure applications on the SAP Cloud Platform. As you'll know, in the Cloud Foundry environment, we have the UAA for authorization and authentication, and there is this SAP flavor called XSUAA, and this blog series by Dennis van Kampen gives you a very decent overview and hands-on guidance on how the things work and how you puzzle all the things together and bring them together and how they work. It's with a Python app. That's also quite interesting. So if you have to deal with the topic, take a look at that blog or at the blog series. Then I announced that, or I brought up that news about the SAP Cloud Platform Launchpad service that was released for SAP Cloud Platform, that comes along with some new capabilities. And Marius Obert highlighted one new capability for SAP Fiori apps. He called it serverless SAP Fiori apps. Well, kind of serverless, I would say. So you can now deploy HTML5 or web apps where you do no longer need, or Fiori apps, where you do no longer need to deploy back-end components on the SAP Cloud Platform. And this little blog guides you through the setup with the new service for HTML5 apps. So it starts on the old state and then guides you along to the new area, to the new service, and how you can benefit from that. Okay, then we are already in the world of the cloud application programming model. As I said last week, Kima Runtime is now available on trial, and well, it absolutely makes sense to now run and deploy a CAP business application on this Kima Runtime. It's I think only logical, and this blog describes how to make your CAP application run on Kima. It's taking a sample application on risk management and well guides you through the step of adopting the application and deploying it to Kima. And that's all described within the SAP Samples GitHub repository. It's a step-by-step guide how to do things. You kind of take this risk application or risk management application and then transform it and do the necessary things. There are two things that I want to draw your attention to. One thing is, in order to deploy it to Kima, you need to have a container, a Docker image, and there's one special flavor of this repository from my perspective is Usually you just deploy it to Docker Hub and then fetch it from there. This tutorial wants to be self-contained, so there is a little bit of thing in order to make then or bring up a container registry within the Kima Kubernetes cluster, which is absolutely not the way we would do it in a productive environment. That's also clearly stated here. I really don't know why they did it. So it's then done via Helm charts, but I followed along that tutorial and push it to Docker Hub. That's much easier, but that's just my opinion. There is a second point, of course, and this is something that I think is currently a weak spot when you think about CAP applications and Kima. CAP, as delivered by SAP, only works with SAP HANA as a database. So you have to wire in the SAP HANA. And this is something that really, is kind of strange, because here you are purely in the Kubernetes ecosystem, and then you have to switch. You have to go to kind of the Cloud Foundry part of the world and deploy your HANA, your HDI container. I tried it. I failed at creating the SAP HANA Cloud Service on Cloud Foundry. It took 20 minutes, then I aborted it. So hopefully this Postgres thingy of Gregor Wolf and all his contributors will soon be really available and super stable, because this is not the way to go. It's too unhandy. Or on the other hand, perhaps SAP is doing something in order to make this hooking up HANA to Kima a bit easier, because this is not that funny, to be honest. Talking about Kima, my absolute favorite on SAP Cloud Platform. I'm biased there, but I really love Kima. It's really one reason or one unique selling point for SAP Cloud Platform from my perspective. And luckily, this week at Devtoberfest, it was all about Project Kima. There I linked the corresponding playlist in my GitHub repo about all the sessions about Project Kima, deploying to Project Kima, exposing services, and so on and so forth. And there is one additional video that's also in the playlist, but I also linked that separately because it's a longer, it's not a small bite-sized like in the Devtoberfest, but it's a longer video by the one and only Thomas Young, who really does the deployment of the SAP Cloud Application Programming Model to SAP Cloud Platform, including all this HANA stuff. And well, I found it quite interesting that he also stumbled about one thing that is not that cool, because in order to make the deployment, you have to install some stuff from SAP Marketplace, this SAP Crypto library, in order to get things running. So yeah, another kind of pitfall if you want to go the way. Nevertheless, the video is, as usual, great content by Thomas Young. And as I said, Kima, from my perspective, the place to go, the place to put your learning effort on if you think about SAP Cloud Platform. But this news is opinionated, so that's my opinion. Maybe you have a different one. Now, as Kima is now part of the trial, the people of the Kima team now also released a tutorial at developers.sap.com how to get started with the SAP Cloud Platform Kima runtime, starting from installing the kubectl, the Kubernetes command line tools, to deploying an MS SQL, and so on and so forth. So there is also one step that's quite nice. It's deploying the Commerce mock application, which is a complete mock of the SAP Commerce Cloud with respect to all the events and APIs that are exposed by SAP Commerce Cloud. So you don't need it to have an account on there. You just deploy the mock into your into Kima, and you can then wire that up in order to consume the events or to make calls out to the APIs. So that's nice. Let's move on with Kima, because up to now there was one gap, and that was exactly concerning hooking up Kima functions with events from Commerce Cloud when it comes to the trial offering. And this gap was closed today. There was a blog post by Marco Dorn. And now we are complete. So what you will see here is that you can now connect your SAP application to Kima runtime, or you can mock an application. There are some documentations linked here. One, the official help.sap.com documentation, and a blog post that tells you how to deploy and how to wire up the SAP Commerce Cloud in a mocked state. So basically the same as in the developer tutorial. So something to try out at the weekend. And last but not least, Gregor Wolf and contributors, they have their Beershot application, and they put in quite some effort and work in order to make the CAP application work with a PostgreSQL database. And of course, as the Kima trial came out, Gregor deployed the CAP application to Kima. There is one thing that I want to draw your attention to when it comes to the deployment. There is just one deployment file, one YAML file that he uses, in contrast to the other tutorials that you might make in the area of Kima, where he put all the things together, which is perfect. But if you follow the tutorials, this might be a bit surprising. So you have services here, you have the pod deployment here, you have the API rule deployment, all in one file. So don't be surprised that everything works just by deploying this one file. And there is another point which is kind of not production ready, but it's not a productive app that is shown here. Gregor deployed one container with a PostgreSQL and one container with the CAP application. Usually within Kima, you probably would wire up your CAP application to a managed PostgreSQL offering that is linked to Kima via the open service broker, probably. But just for you for your information, so to say. Then some news from the other area, from Steampunk. As you all know, Steampunk is the ABAP runtime on SAP Cloud Platform. It's a different ABAP runtime than you have on-premise, different with respect to what's available, what's possible. So for example, no DynPros are there in SAP Cloud Platform. And this made it difficult, not to say impossible, to use ABAP Git. And there is now one project, one open source project that's called Odence. And this gives you some REST API endpoints in order to interact with ABAP Git and build ABAP development tools plugins with these REST endpoints. So I linked the blog post in my GitHub repo, and there is also a link to the GitHub repo of Project Odence. It's open source, you can contribute. So maybe that comes in handy. Fine. Another news, I think I mentioned that, I'm not quite sure. There is an add-on for linking the enterprise messaging on SAP Cloud Platform with your ERP system. And the nice thing about this add-on is, first, it's free, and second, it's not only available for S4HANA, but it's downported to, I think, until NetWeaver 7.31 or something like that. So it's really quite low. So you can use it from a business suite in order to make side-by-side extensions, message-based side-by-side extensions with SAP Cloud Platform up to S4HANA. So that's really super cool that that's possible, and that opens up quite new use cases from my perspective. There are two blogs. This is the second part of the blog series about how to enable the add-on. That's basically described in part 2, and this is now another part, a how-to guide on how to create messages and bring the stuff to life. Again, it's really a step-by-step guide, so I think that's also not having been able to do it on the system, or did not find the time to do it. I think that's really kicking things off and making your life easier if you want to start with connecting up your ERP system with SAP Enterprise Messaging. And there is another really great news about SAP S4HANA APIs and the ability to consume them. You all know that there is the API Business Hub, which is kind of the central place where you have all the APIs, all the events, and even much, much more information on how to do the integration with S4 and with SuccessFactors and so on and so forth. However, when it comes to S4HANA, only S4HANA Cloud was supported until 7th of October 2020. Now you can also link in S4HANA on-prem into API Business Hub. So that was long requested by a lot of different parties, and now it has become reality. I think, yeah, here we have the numbers. It's 290 APIs, so approximately half OData, half SOAP APIs, and also 178 business events that are available right from the start. So for all of you who like to do side-by-side extensions, this, I think, comes in quite handy. There is one thing that you have to keep in mind. For S4HANA Cloud, there is a sandboxing environment for the S4HANA APIs. That's not available for S4HANA on-prem, at least not yet available. Yeah, so that was it from the SAP part of the house. Let's switch over to Microsoft. I do not have that many news from the Microsoft area, to be honest. There is one thing that I think I have to draw your attention to, or you anyway have seen it probably. Somehow currently Microsoft is rolling out a lot of not that high quality stuff on their cloud environments. So 2 weeks ago, Azure Active Directory went down, which is not good. Then last week there have been quite some issues with Outlook, especially with the web-based API. That also stroke through to Teams, at least for some folks. And yeah, now we have again an outage in the area of Office and Outlook. Not that cool, because these outages are also taking quite some time in order to get them set up again. So I think the Outlook outage of last week was several hours. So not that great time at the moment for Microsoft from my perspective. Nevertheless, I have two things in the area of serverless. One is an interesting blog post. If you go to the low-code solution of Microsoft Azure called Azure Logic Apps, which is like a workflow modeling tool. And as it's low-code, it's not that easy to handle failed actions, or it's a natural way to do that stuff. And this blog post kind of highlights how you can deal with failed actions in Azure Logic Apps. Quite helpful if you use them. I think Azure Logic Apps are often used as a glue between SAP systems and Microsoft systems. So this really makes sense to take a look at the blog and see how those failed actions can be dealt with. Then there was serverless days, this time in Warsaw. And the serverless days is a kind of a overall serverless event. So it's not Microsoft specific. Talks are from AWS, from AWS offerings, from Microsoft offerings, from Google offerings. I liked this serverless days Warsaw quite a lot because the focus topic was operations and monitoring. And this is something that's often forgotten when it comes to serverless, because yeah, it's serverless, I don't have to care about anything. That's kind of true. There are some things that you have to take into account and that you have really to deal with when it comes to serverless. And these talks really are a great overview about how to deal with the stuff, what are patterns, and it's also good to see that others stumbled across problems like here from oops to ops. Very funny talk on how to deal with some kind of classical pitfalls when it comes to operating serverless workloads. Then, in order to kind of round up the Kima topic, as you know, Kima is based on Kubernetes. If you want to go a level deeper and see what is Kubernetes, how does it work, there is a Kubernetes learning path available on Microsoft Azure that you can download. That gives you some insight. There are also several learning paths on how to deal with Kubernetes. If you want to go into that area, and I highly recommend you, because I highly recommend to use Kima, this is a very interesting resource. Then there is one blog that I put in that area, although it's available on the SAP community, and the title was a bit misleading. It is Kubernetes to the Limit, 10 things we learned in our SAP Business Application Studio journey. Forget about SAP Business Application Studio, that's not the topic of this blog, and it's a really, from my perspective, one of the rare high quality blogs on the SAP community. It's absolutely worth reading. It's about SAP Business Application Studio from the perspective of operating it as SAP, and it's operated on Kubernetes. And there are these 10 learnings that came along, really structured what was the challenge, what was the process of SAP, how did they mitigate it, and what was the lessons learned out of their process and their moving on. That starts from Kubernetes as a service over costs and ends up at kind of organizational topics like think first, then act. So really great read, highly recommend it, really high quality content from my perspective. I really would be happy to see more on that on SAP community. Then something about DevOps, GitHub Actions, and Azure Resource Manager. You can now bring those things together in order to create CI/CD. And there is a nice video with Abel Wang, kind of the guru of DevOps at Microsoft Azure. Always great to watch. So if you are working in that area, take a look at that. Then let's switch gears and go to where both worlds meet, SAP and Microsoft. Here we have another blog of Martin Repple. He already had a blog about principal propagation in a multi-cloud environment that was focusing on Microsoft Azure and SAP Cloud Platform. And the scope of the blog, or the second part of the blog, was now enlarged. And we now also connect to on-premise corporate network using Cloud Connector, SAP Gateway, and so on and so forth. So if you have to do it, and unfortunately that's kind of one of the main things that you have to do, it's about principal propagation, and then this blog is really helpful, and it's not easy to do it, unfortunately. yeah, that was it from the integration part of the house. So there were not that many news in the last week, but yeah, I mean, that's how it is. So I will now switch to the productivity section. And well, one thing that came out at the end of September was on GitHub. Code scanning is now available, so it's generally available also on public repos. So you can now enable code scanning on your public repositories, and this will give you some security checks on your repository out of the box. So that's quite nice that that's available now, and quite helpful if you have repos there. Then concerning Windows Terminal, there is another blog on the Windows Terminal by Scott Hanselman that I think is worth reading. It gives you a kickstart on how to work with Windows Terminal. And from my perspective, this is really, if you are working on Windows, use Windows Terminal, because that really is a great tool and helps you in becoming productive. Then there is another thing that I wanted to highlight. It's by Thomas Young again. It's about installing SAP S/4HANA Express Edition. That's not the main topic I want to focus on, but it's showing, and it's about installing it on WSL2, so on the Windows subsystem for Linux 2. And that really shows the power of this combination. So you are working on Windows, you have the Windows subsystem for Linux 2 enabled. This really is a game changer. You can even install SAP HANA there. So SAP HANA Express Edition there. So that's, I think, worth reading and worth taking a look if you think about what's possible from a development perspective with these new offerings by Microsoft and Windows. Then another one, if you're working with themes, if you're working with those tools, there is a free add-on for Microsoft Teams that allows you to do ad hoc reflections. So questionnaires like, how do you feel about this week? And you can then answer that. I think a quite important add-on, a quite important app in a time when we all work a lot of remote and we cannot really get hands on the feelings of the team members. This is really helpful. You have to install it manually. You have to have some resources on Azure in order to make it run. It's not quite sure if this will become an official app, but if you want to use it, it's open source, so you can use it. You can deploy it to your Teams tenant. So it's quite straightforward. I did it for our sandbox, so take a look at it. I would recommend. Now, one thing that I wanted to mention, I did not put a link here, is DSAG Live. So next week, from educational and conferences perspective, there is the German-speaking user group event, the annual conference. You can still register, I think, especially as a member of the German-speaking user group. It will be completely remote, so there will be a lot of short sessions that you can consume remote. There is also kind of a virtual conference venue, also with a partner exhibition. So I'm quite curious how this works out. So that's the complete next week where this will take place. So yeah, if you are there, enjoy. I will definitely be there and also host 2 sessions. Now, before we close, I want to draw your attention to one person that I like to highlight and that I think you should follow, because she's throwing out quite some high quality content, and it's Divya Murray. We already had her today, and we already had her last week when it came to the integration of SharePoint and SAP Cloud Platform or SAP ERP systems. And she's really pushing out some interesting content, not only in the area of SAP and Microsoft, but also in the area of SAP Cloud Platform. So yeah, I would recommend to follow her. And now, Before I let you leave into the weekend, one more thing. I came across that. It has nothing to do with SAP and Microsoft, but it really kind of closes today's story where we started with customer experience. And that's a tweet by Tobias Hoffmann and the interaction with Amazon. And well, he was not really happy about what was presented at Amazon Music for him. He fired out a tweet on that, and surprisingly, Amazon Help answered. And well, it's just 6 tweets, short tweets. So if you want to smile a bit, and if you want to see what, from my perspective, great customer experience looks like, then read that tweet. Okay, with that, I would like to finish. Again, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. As an outlook, I guess next week I will have focus topic of the DSHE Live, so of the DSHE annual conference. There will be not that much about Microsoft, at least that's the plan at the moment. So have a nice weekend, have a nice week, perhaps have a nice DSHE Live, and well, see you next week. Until then, bye.